A lot to talk about on today's Philadelphia Eagles Now, so let's get to it. Here's a look at the Eagles Now rundown. The Birds making a roster move. We have some bad injury news on tight end Dallas Goedert. The Nick Sirianni-Vic Fangio trade-off that's paid off. And I want to get to a cool Cooper DeJean story from when I was at the NFL Scouting Combine. First, thank you so much to the Bird Gang. Without all of your support, what we do here would not be possible under the Chat Sports umbrella and on this channel. And here on this channel, we continue to approach getting that silver plaque from YouTube. We surpassed 93,000 subscribers this morning, and we're flying to 100K. So if you want Eagles shows every single day year-round, the preeminent coverage for the Birds right here on YouTube, lock us in and hit that sub button. Speaking of that, programming reminder, tomorrow, Wednesday, December 4th, we will be live beginning at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, 2:30 out on the West Coast. So, once again, hit that sub button. To that Eagles roster move, and they can end up making another roster move depending on the injury status of Dallas Goedert, and that's coming up next. Philadelphia waiving wide receiver Parris Campbell. He was elevated to the active roster on Sunday, but then he's let go on Monday. With Johnny Wilson and Devontae Smith missing that game against Baltimore, the Eagles were very thin at that wide receiver spot. They pretty much didn't have any depth at that position. That's why you saw a lot of Britton Covey, some extended snaps for Jahan Dotson. That's why Parris Campbell was on the field. That's why you saw a couple of two tight end sets. But this is all a part of roster maneuvering for Howie Roseman and this team, because Parris Campbell was out of practice squad elevation. So Philadelphia couldn't do what they did earlier in the year when they were dealing with injuries to that wide receiver spot to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, when they simply elevated Parris Campbell to the active roster. They couldn't do that for Sunday. So they had to sign him to the active roster, and he played a good amount. 50% of the offensive snaps in that win against the Ravens, 24% on special teams. What I think this signals and what it means is that the Eagles have to feel good looking ahead to Sunday's game against Carolina. We'll be doing a watch party for that game here on Eagles Now about the injury status around Devontae Smith, who's now missed the last two games with the hamstring injury, and that hamstring injury has been bothering him over the last couple of weeks. He worked out pregame against Baltimore. He was a late scratch, which tells us he's getting closer to returning to the game field. And he also returned to practice late last week because on Thursday and Friday, he was a limited participant. So you let go of Campbell. That has to mean that Devontae Smith is coming back soon. Don't rule out Parris Campbell clearing waivers and then coming back to Philadelphia on the practice squad for an emergency type of situation. And you want to experience the crazy life of a player on an NFL roster bubble? Look at all of the transactions here for Parris Campbell just over the last couple of months and going back to free agency. So last several months to be correct. He signed with the Eagles on March 21st. On August 27th, as part of the Eagles trimming down their roster to 53 players, Philadelphia had released Parris Campbell. On August 28th, brought him back to the practice squad. September 16th, signed him to the active roster. September 7th, signed him to the practice squad. On the 21st, elevated Parris Campbell to the active roster from the taxi squad. On the 23rd of September, he was signed back to the practice squad. On the 28th, he was elevated to the active game day roster. On the 30th of September, assigned to the practice squad. October 12th, Eagles signed him to the active roster. October 22nd, they released him. October 23rd, they signed him back to the practice squad. And then on November 30th, the Eagles signed him to the active roster from the practice squad. What a crazy path this calendar year for Parris Campbell. That is the life of a player on a roster bubble. As for Dallas Goedert, Jeff McClain with this news on Monday that Dallas Goedert's knee injury that he suffered against Baltimore after he scored that touchdown on that RPO from Jalen Hurts to really get the Eagles working on the offensive side of the ball and moving was not deemed serious upon initial diagnosis. He'll undergo further testing today, as of Monday, yesterday, but the team is hoping it's just a knee sprain. After an MRI, Goedert's knee injury will likely sideline him on a week-to-week basis. He could be a candidate for short-term injured reserve based on his recovery, but the injury is not season-ending. So if Goedert goes on IR, he has to miss a minimum of 4 games. That's the short-term IR stint. Week 14 against Carolina, Week 15 against Pittsburgh, Week 16 against the Commanders, Week 17 against the Cowboys. And by the way, that Pittsburgh game is at Lincoln Financial Field, so our mistake on that. And this is unfortunate for Goedert. A lot of injury problems for him this year. He missed time earlier with the hamstring injury, but really throughout his career has not played an entire season since his rookie year in 2018 when the Eagles drafted him after they won the Super Bowl. That future Zach Ertz replacement was in their mind then, and that ended up ringing true. He's missed 11 of the Eagles' last 46 possible regular season games. It's about 24%. And he is an upright runner, a tall guy who can sometimes take some hits down low. And then when he gets taken down, he has to fall a long way to the ground. And so we've seen these injuries happen. And this is a look at the Eagles' tight end depth chart and how they'll have to survive without Goedert. Jack Stoll signed with the Miami Dolphins. They took him off the Eagles practice squad. So Jack Stoll is on the Eagles roster, or on the Dolphins roster, excuse me. But on the Eagles roster, you have Greg Calcaterra as the backup tight end. Earlier this year, he filled in very nicely for Goedert as a pass catcher, but he's not the blocker that Goedert is. And then you have E.J. Jenkins and C.J. Uzomah on the practice squad, and both of those players have been elevated to the active roster on multiple occasions this season. C.J. Uzomah, in particular, the last 2 games in Philadelphia has used him in some bunch sets, some heavy sets, primarily as a blocker, and he's done a good job in that role. For Goedert, this also sucks because while Calcaterra has filled in nicely for him, he's just not the all-around tight end that Goedert is. We see the potential every time Goedert is involved with this offense. Against New Orleans, he helped Philadelphia win the game as he went nuts with like 160 receiving yards and that huge 69-yarder late in the game, if I'm not mistaken, as far as the yardage on that play. And then the Eagles, they were doing nothing offensively against Baltimore in that first quarter. But then on that little RPO, Hurtt rolls left, he hits Goedert, and he takes it to the end zone for that touchdown. And this is a Philadelphia team that prides itself on being a physical football team. Dallas Goedert is a part of that because he is a physical football player. Plenty more to get to here on the show, but first, be sure to give me a follow on X and Instagram, in addition to all of the long-form videos here on YouTube and talking about the Eagles on my social media pages. I'm always chopping it up, talking about the Birds and the NFL. It's at Chase_Senior on X, at Chase_Senior on Instagram, reaching millions of people on those platforms in addition to here on YouTube. So far here on the show, Birds making a roster move with Parris Campbell. They could make that other roster move with Dallas Goedert if they put him on IR, but we got to the injury news there. Next, I'm going to talk about the Nick Sirianni, Vic Fangio trade-off that's paid off, and a cool Cooper DeJean story that I have from the NFL Scouting Combine. Today's sponsor, our friends at Game Time. If you want to go to Eagles-Panthers on Sunday at Lincoln Financial Field, plenty of tickets available. If you've never been to Lincoln Financial Field, one of the more special environments in all of sports. And if you can tailgate prior to the game in the K-Lot, it's such a unique atmosphere. And if you want to put together great memories and go to games, download the Game Time app. Best seats at the lowest price guaranteed. Prices drop as the event gets closer. And right now, when you download the app and you create an account and you use the code CHATSPORTS, CHATSPORTS, you get $20 off. Terms apply. First purchase only. Lot of Eagles games left. If you want to check one out at the link, and hopefully some playoff games as well, you have Panthers at Eagles, Steelers at Eagles, Cowboys at Eagles, Giants at Eagles. So the Birds only with one road game so far left on the road against the Commanders. And you saw how Eagles fans were able to take over L.A. against the Rams. You saw how they were able to take over M&T Bank Stadium. Eagles fans always travel, so you can get tickets to road games as well. And also concerts, comedy shows, theater events, and a whole lot more. $20 off. using the code CHATSPORTS. See the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with our friends at Game Time. What time is it? Game time. All right, topic number 3. A trade-off that's paid off. Kind of a catchy line there. Remember during training camp and remember during the preseason when here on this show, we talked about Vic Fangio's influence with the Eagles' practice habits. And you think about last year, Nick Sirianni was very conservative with the Eagles coming off that Super Bowl. That led to them lacking in fundamentals. Penalties, sloppy play, bad tackling. Vic Fangio comes in. He's an NFL lifer. He's been in the NFL for decades upon decades. He grew up in Dunmore, the neighboring town of Scranton. He's an old school football guy. And back in the day when he was getting his start and throughout his coaching career, even when he was a defensive coordinator for Jim Harbaugh's San Francisco 49ers in the early 2010s, the game was much different. The practice habits were different. But with the NFL changing the way that teams can practice, the physicality has gone away a little bit. And some of the fundamentals of blocking offensively, tackling defensively, they've gone by the wayside. But Vic Fangio suggested to Nick Sirianni that they have longer practices and more physical practices. And what has that resulted in? It's Philadelphia Eagles defense being so fundamentally sound and them adapting very quickly to Vic Fangio's defense. So he suggests to Sirianni, we got to have longer practices, more physical practices to get these players ready. We're trying to learn and master a new defensive scheme. I have all these new pieces. I have to see what they're able to do. Normally, Sirianni has been conservative on the player side of safety, but credit to Nick Sirianni. He was malleable in his approach. He was willing to make an adjustment. And now during the season, the Eagles have had a lot of practices on Wednesdays instead of walkthroughs. And after that win against the Ravens on Sunday on the road, Nick Sirianni was mic'd up in the locker room, as he always is during these victory speeches, and he said, we're working tomorrow. No day off. We're working tomorrow. Guess what happened? Eagles players were pumped up about that. And this all has to do with the Eagles being a physical football team, and Vic Fangio has played a role in that. Want to take a look at this tweet from E.J. Smith, who covers the Eagles for the Philadelphia Inquirer, a fellow Temple alum, went to Temple University with him, friend of the show, and he had tweeted this out. Jordan Davis on the Eagles defense improving their tackling so much midseason. Jordan Davis said this, quote, we're in full pads in practice, and that's something that we embrace, because when you do that in practice, you don't have any choice in the game. You have to be a physical player. Davis noted that the team has been holding actual practices instead of walkthroughs more on Wednesdays than they have in years past. Quote, it takes what it takes. Obviously, our physicality is on display, and everybody feels it. And Vic Fangio had some quotes today about the Eagles' practice habits and their time spent practicing. Here's what he said about Cooper DeJean's development. I think the more he plays and the more experienced he becomes, you try and expose him to as much stuff as you can in practice, but obviously with the low reps of practice, you don't get that done always. So Fangio taking exception a little bit to a certain degree with these new practicing rules, and I think it's led to more poor play across the NFL. Again, as far as the nuances, right? Blocking techniques, physicality, tackling, timing at the snap, offensively and defensively in that regard. And then Vic Fangio said this about players hitting the rookie wall. Back in the day, you'd have 2-a-days in training camp, and when you got a rookie that you thought would play, you'd practice him a lot. He'd play a lot in preseason games when there were 4. Well, that don't happen anymore. So I don't buy the rookie wall anymore. It's not physical. It might be mental or emotional, but it's not physical anymore in my opinion. That is a football guy, if I've ever heard it. And that type of football guy mentality, it's helped this Eagles organization. And you can see that translate to the playing field. When they play bully ball, Broad Street bullies, they really take pride in that. And they've been able to beat up teams and wear them down throughout the course of a 60-minute ball game on both sides of the rock. Fangio also grew up a Philadelphia sports fan, growing up in northeastern Pennsylvania. He referenced Allen Iverson today. He said the more you practice, the more you play better, the better you get, in spite of what Allen Iverson ever said. Love that. As for my Cooper DeJean story, so when you go to the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, it's a very interesting setting. And I've covered the Super Bowl over the last couple of years on Super Bowl Radio Row, and there's a stark difference between Super Bowl Radio Row and the NFL Combine. Super Bowl Radio Row, you have celebrities from all walks of life. It's glitz, it's glamour, and you have big sets along Super Bowl Radio Row. Pat McAfee, ESPN, NFL Network, Fox Sports, Outkick, Kay Adams Show, a bunch of sets that go all across the pit where Radio Row is. Sirius XM, you have golf simulators next to Sirius XM. It's a crazy setup, and you can definitely sense the intensity in the lead up to the big game, but it's also the mega event of the NFL calendar year. When you go to the NFL Scouting Combine, it's a lot more relaxed, and it's more of like a business conference to a certain degree. All teams are looking ahead to the following season. Every team resets. Everybody's 0-0 with their record, and they have newfound hope for the upcoming year because they get to refresh and reset a little bit, and they're trying to find the prospects who are going to really have an impact with their organization. And it's more about scouting and football at the NFL Scouting Combine, whereas at the Super Bowl, there's a lot of that glitz and glamour with all of those celebrities making all of these appearances. And so you have an opportunity at the Combine to speak with prospects, but then you get to speak with NFL executives, NFL insiders, coaches who are looking for jobs. It's a little bit of a job fair where people are handing out resumes, but also all these coaches are getting together, and it's a little bit of a networking event. But also when you leave the facility where the Combine is and where the media kind of resides, and you go out on the town in Indianapolis, you run into coaches, you run into execs, you run into players' parents at times, and you're able to chop it up. And so I was out in Indy back in March, and I was told by a source the only top 30 visit that Cooper DeJean had coming out of Iowa, and the only one that was set, was with the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, he was coming off a broken leg that he suffered back in November, about a year ago at this point, in practice, and some teams had put the medical red flag on Cooper DeJean, and they were a little bit worried about that injury. But the Eagles, right from the jump, even though DeJean couldn't partake in the NFL Combine drills and all of the athletic testing for the most part, they fell in love with the player in the pre-draft process. And so I tweeted that out. I don't report news often, but when I do, I hit on a lot of the news. And I wanted to pass along this story here because it's resulted in where we are right now. The general manager, Howie Roseman, and owner Jeffrey Lurie loved DeJean as a player at Iowa. They were shocked that he fell to the second round. And there's a great story of how Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman went to sleep after round one, and they're thinking to themselves, how is he falling to round two? And number two, we're never going to have an opportunity to draft him unless we trade up. And so the Eagles trade up in a move with the Washington Commanders. Thank you to another divisional team. The Commanders gave Philadelphia Cooper DeJean. The Giants gave Philadelphia Saquon Barkley. And there's a viral clip that's gone around over the last couple of months, and it resurfaced the other day, of Howie and Lurie are like, oh my gosh, we're not going to get DeJean because the Rams are going to take him. The Rams don't take Cooper DeJean. They take Braden Fisk, the defensive lineman who we saw the other night. And so Howie races to the phone. He's like, yes! And he makes that trade with Washington. He calls Cooper DeJean and he says, you're an effing Eagle. And Cooper DeJean this year has played a huge role in Philadelphia's defensive turnaround, and he's been one of the highest graded cornerbacks in all of football. And him starting for this team, coming out of the bye against Cleveland, helped to spark this defensive turnaround. And Philadelphia, since that game, is the number one overall defense in the National Football League. DeJean has played a role in that, and right from the jump, he was making exceptional plays against Cleveland. He's done it ever since. And here is a look of where he ranks among all corners in the National Football League. Overall Pro Football Focus grade, 82.4. 5th in the league. His coverage grade, 84.3, 5th in the league. When I was saying that he's one of the top corners in the game, I'm not lying. No cap. And this Eagles defensive turnaround from last year to this year has been insane. We showed these numbers yesterday, but we have to revisit them because they're just incredible to me. Philadelphia, 26th in yards per game, 25th in yards per play, 30th in third downs, 30th in the red zone, 24th in sacks. Those numbers last year. This year, 1st in yards per game, 2nd in yards per play, 2nd on third downs, 5th in the red zone, 7th best sack percentage. And their points per game allowed has gone down from 23.6, 28th among 32 teams, to 18.2. That is 4th. Cooper DeJean playing a role in that. Wanted to pass along that story. That's the type of intel that you get here on this show. Real One roll call. If you enjoyed today's show, type Real One down below. I hope that you were entertained. I hope you were fulfilled. I hope you found today's show insightful because that's what we try to do here on this show.